In an era of tumultuous power struggles that were still taking place at that time, this is a story about the life and struggles of a legend who lived on the mainland of Japan. In those days, a young child who was given the name Shinta by his parents had a difficult existence. His parents abandoned him when he was very young, and he endured a miserable life to the point where he was even sold into slavery on multiple occasions. Until one day, a powerful swordsman by the name of Hitokiri met with Shinta, who had just fled from a group of criminals at the time. During that encounter, Hitokiri recognized the aptitude and ability that Shinta possessed. Therefore, Hitokiri brought up Shinta to be his student. At the time, Hitokiri believed that Shinta's name was not appropriate for a swordsman since it was too gentle. Kenshin, which literally translates to the heart of the sword, was the name that Hitokiri decided to give the boy instead of Shinta. Following Kenshin's enrollment as a student of Hitokiri, he was afforded the opportunity to acquire training in a variety of sword techniques during this period. One of these techniques is known as the Hiten Mitsurugi Ryu method. Kenshin is able to move rapidly and eliminate a significant number of adversaries with the use of this powerful move. In addition, Kenshin was taught the Madoshi Giri and Zentetsu movements, which are two techniques that enable him to effortlessly and rapidly cut through anything. Kenshin eventually broke up with Hitokiri and started his journey back to a world that was rife with disorder after a number of years had gone. Kenshin is now making the transition to his new life as a swordsman, often known as a samurai. A new objective for Kenshin is to thwart a government that is both oppressive and abusive. The Kashu is a rebel group that Kenshin is interested in joining. Overthrowing the shogunate government, also known as the Edo administration, which has been causing the people to suffer, is the goal of this organization. By restoring the power of the Meiji emperor, who is now being held back by the administration of the shogunate, the Chosu group hopes to achieve their goal. When Kenshin first joined the Chosu gang, he was put through a test by a samurai who was also a member of the Chosu group. Kenshin's appearance at that time did not like that of a samurai. In fact, it was more fitting for Kenshin to look like a farmer who merely carried a wooden sword. As a result, the samurai did not take Kenshin seriously. Initially, Kenshin was apprehensive about engaging in combat with the samurai. He reasoned that he did not want to damage others who were struggling alongside him. Shinsaku Takasuji, the leader of the Chosu organization, was showing interest in Kenshin at that precise moment. After that, Takasuji went to Kenshin and informed him that if he wanted to become a member of the Kashu group, he needed to demonstrate his capabilities. After then, Kenshin agreed to fulfill Takasuji's request. After that, Kenshin engaged in combat with the samurai challenge posed by the Kashu. It was during this encounter that Takasuji and everyone others were awestruck by Kenshin's talents. Kenshin rendered the samurai from the Kashu defenseless with a single and powerful assault. In addition to Takasuji, another Chosu officer by the name of Kogoro Katsura was astonished by Kenshin's ability. He had not anticipated coming into someone who was capable of using the Hiten Mitsurugi Ryu technique. Kogoro Katsura desired for Kenshin to join him under his direction. At that time, Takasuji granted his request because he believed that Katsura would be better able to manage Kenshin if Kenshin turned into a lethal killing machine. Kogoro Katsura is known as the runner samurai because he is a peace-loving samurai who does not want to battle directly. Instead, he loves to command from behind the shadows, which is why he is known as the runner samurai. Kogoro Katsura, on the other hand, possesses a powerful charisma and control that allows him to readily exert his authority over others around him. This is the basis for Takasuji's decision to entrust Kenshin to Kogoro Katsura. Under the command of Kogoro Katsura, Kenshin was given mission after mission, and over time, he evolved into a highly dangerous killing machine. Kenshin was responsible for the deaths of dozens, even hundreds, of people. The people of the Tsushima group, who are a group of shogun supporters, are one of the people whom Kenshin has slain. Even though Kenshin is by himself, he is still able to finish off the samurai who belong to the Tsushima group. Kenshin's strength and prowess persisted until he took on the nickname Hitokiri Battousai, which literally translates to Battousai the Slayer. As a result of the fact that Kenshin's lunge started to become a significant danger to the shogunate gave the order for the Shinsengumi, which are the shogunate's elite special forces, to actively search for Kenshin. Shinsengumi was comprised of famous samurai, like as Saito Hajime and Tsuji Okita. Following the killing of the Tsushima group, Kenshin carried out his next task, which was to massacre the Shigakura group, which was also a group of Shogun sympathizers when he arrived there. Once more, Kenshin was successful in killing a number of members of the Shigakura group. At this time, Kenshin received a cut on the cheek from a Shigakura samurai by the name of Kayasado Akira. Following the slaughter of the Shigakura gang and the assassination of Kayasado Akira, Kenshin desired to take a brief vacation from the task while simultaneously concealing himself from the adversary. This was due to the fact that Kenshin had discovered that he was the target of multiple parties. Over the course of the past half-year, Kenshin has been responsible for the deaths of 600 people. Kenshin is also aware that other organizations, such as Shinsengumi forces and other assassination squads, have begun to target him. Until one day in a tavern, Kenshin met a woman named Yukishiro Tomo. Kenshin at that time helped Tomo from the disturbance of the fake samurai in the small tavern. After that, when Kenshin wanted to leave, it turned out that Kenshin had been targeted by a shadow assassin from the shogunate. Luckily this time Kenshin easily killed the shadow assassin from the shogunate's side. The battle of Kenshin and the shadow assassin was seen by Tomo directly from very close, which made Tomo faint at that time. After that, Kenshin brought Tomo to the Ikedaien in Kyoto City, which is one of the hideouts of the Kashu organization, so that he could receive treatment. At the time that Kenshin awoke from his slumber, Tomo was already awake. In fact, Tomo assisted the waiter at the Ikedaien with his work. Tomo shared with Kenshin that she wished to work as a waitress in the Ikedaien because she did not have a family or a place to call home. Following the hearing of Tomo's rationale, Kenshin allowed Tomo to become one of the servants at the Ikedai setup. Tomo assists with the work that is being done there on a daily basis and keeps a small diary whenever she has some spare time. Kenshin, on the other hand, continues to carry out massacre missions while concealing himself and his identity. One thing that sets Kenshin's trail of massacres apart from others is that he always leaves a murder warrant at the location when the murder mission is over. The letter is a sign that Hitokiri Battousai is the one who committed the massacre. However, some members of the Chosu group did not simply disregard Tomo's presence, rather, they were concerned that Tomo was an enemy spy. This was due to the fact that the shogunate had recently become aware of the plans that the Chosu group had been working on. Additionally, since Tomo's arrival, Kenshin's instincts have not been as alert as they normally are, and they are concerned that Tomo's presence will cause Kenshin to show signs of weakness. After Katsura became aware of the tales that his comrades were spreading about Tomo, he decided to speak with Tomo. He advised Tomo not to make Kenshin dull because Kenshin was the ace that Kashu had against the shogunate. One day, after Kenshin had completed the assignment, word arrived that one of the members of the Chosu group, Furukawa, had been captured by the Shinsengumi. At that moment, the Shinsengumi were making their way to the Ikedaien in order to launch an assault on the Chosu group's hideout. Those members of the Chosu who were at the Ikedaien when they were unexpectedly attacked were unable to do much to defend themselves. The Shinsengumi forces massacred a significant number of them. After hearing the news, Kenshin immediately made his way back to the Ikedaien. However, as he was on his way, he was stopped by Tsuji Okita. Tsuji Okita did not allow Kenshin to assist his comrades in any manner. Then Kenshin had to fight Tsuji Okita. In that fight, Tsuji Okita looked like he couldn't handle Kenshin. Even though Tsuji Okita was great and became the leader of Unit 1 Shinsengumi, he couldn't beat Kenshin. Shinsengumi forces from another unit, specifically Unit 3 Saito Hajime, arrived just as Okita was on the verge of being eliminated by Kenshin. On the other hand, Katagai and the remaining members of the Chosu group picked up Kenshin and asked him to retreat because Katsura had escaped and survived, and there was no point in fighting the Shinsengumi now because the Chosu group needed to save troops. Despite the fact that Kenshin and the other members of Chosu were extremely enraged at the moment since their fellow soldiers had been slaughtered by the Shinsengumi group, they made the decision not to engage in combat with Saito Hajime and his troops. This was due to the fact that the Chosu group's current goal is to retreat and retrieve their troops in order to regain their strength. Saito Hajime, on the other hand, was equally apprehensive about engaging in combat with Kenshin at this time. He had come to the realization that he would not be able to match the might of Kenshin's dreadful blade. Chosu's defeat was then marked by the Kinmon incident, which was the burning of the city center of Kyoto. This caused the Chosu group to be considered criminals, despite the fact that they were not criminals. The Chosu group's sole objective was to fight the shogunate and bring the emperor from Edo back to Kyoto, as well as to return the throne of government to the rightful emperor. Following the Shinsengumi slaughter of the Kashu group in Kyoto, the Chosu gang in Kenshin subsequently ran away from the city. In order to prevent Tomo from getting wounded, Kenshin advised him to leave because the situation on Kenshin's side was extremely hazardous. However, Tomo did not agree. He determined that he would always be with Kenshin. Since Kenshin was impressed by Tomo's doggedness, he ultimately gave Tomo permission to be by his side, and he made a commitment to safeguard Tomo. After that, Kenshin visited Katsura to talk about the next steps that should be taken. During the time that they were waiting for orders to begin a new plan, Katsura advised Kenshin and Tomo to first conceal themselves in a secluded village. Katsura's commands were followed by Kenshin and Tomo. Then, Kenshin and Tomo lived together in a cabin in a remote place, away from the hustle and bustle of the crowds and the conflicts. Now Kenshin and Tomo temporarily live in peace. Every day they both eat with the results of gardening and utilize the forest products around their place of residence. It was in those days that Kenshin seemed to begin to feel calm and happiness again after so long. Until it crossed his mind that he wanted to forget his way of life as a slaughtering samurai and live with Tomo forever. At that moment Kenshin and Tomo decided to become a married couple. Kenshin and Tomo's days were filled with happiness until one day, a member of the Chosu group named Lazuka visited them. When Lazuka showed up, it was to tell Kenshin that the Kashu group was probably going to end. Lazuka also conveyed a message from Katagai to Kenshin, in which Katagai requested that he give him some money so that Kenshin may live peacefully with Tomo and not return to the Chosu group to slay the enemies. When Lazuka had finished conveying these messages to Kenshin, he then parted ways with him and stated that it was possible that he might never see Kenshin again. After parting ways with Kenshin, Lazuka met a bunch of Shogun's shadow assassins. It comes out Lazuka was a spy working for the shogunate all along, and he was the mastermind behind the leak of the Kashu group's plot to the shogunate group. Katagai was aware of Lazuka's planned rendezvous with the shadow assassin group of the shogunate. Katagai has been watching Lazuka in a covert manner for the entirety of this time, and Katagai has been harboring the suspicion that Lazuka is a betrayer of the Chosu gang. However, it is quite unfortunate. When Katagai surreptitiously eavesdropped on Lazuka's talk with the shadow assassin gang, he was eventually discovered by the shadow assassins working for the shogun, and as a result, Katagai's life was promptly put to an end. Additionally, there was a young man named Enishi Yukishiro who was there during the meeting between Lazuka and the shadow assassin force of the shogunate. This dispute started when Kenshin had finished killing Kiyosato Akira, who then revealed out to be Kiyosato Akira, who was Tomo Yukishiro's fiancé. It found out that the boy is the younger brother of Tomo Yukishiro. Tomo Yukishiro was genuinely at a loss for what to do after the death of Kiyosato Akira. However, one day, Tomo Yukishiro was confronted by a gang of shadow shogunate assassins who volunteered to assist him in exacting revenge on Kenshin. According to the initial plan, Tomo Yukishiro was instructed to approach Kenshin in order to determine the weak point of Kenshin. As a result, Tomo Yukishiro traveled from Edo to Kyoto, which was the location where Kenshin was located at the respective time. On the other hand, Enishi Yukishiro made the decision to travel to Kyoto in order to assist his sister in carrying out his plan to exact revenge on Kenshin. He was aware that his sister had traveled to Kyoto in order to do so. Enishi is currently working with the shadow assassin group of the shogun because of this reason. Enishi then went straight to see Tomo Yukishiro, as he had been missing his older sister a great deal. Tomo Yukishiro was taken aback when she saw Enishi Yukishiro, who had unexpectedly come to see her. Enishi spoke with Tomo Yukishiro and informed him that vengeance against the Hitokiri Battousai will be carried out soon. Enishi's words shocked Tomo Yukishiro right away. She didn't understand how Enishi could be a part of the shogunate's shadow assassin group. When Tomo Yukishiro heard Enishi's words, she felt sad because she didn't think the plan to kill the Kenshin would be carried out right away. After being with Kenshin for a period of time, Tomo Yukishiro's desire to exact revenge on Kenshin for the loss of her fiancé gradually faded away. In Tomo Yukishiro's opinion, Kenshin was not fully to blame for the death of her fiancé. Kenshin was simply fighting for the justice that he carried out, and Tomo Yukishiro's fiancé also had the same obligation. Tomo Yukishiro felt that Kenshin was not entirely to blame. Tomo Yukishiro is of the opinion that despite the fact that Kenshin has been responsible for the loss of a great number of lives, it has also been responsible for the safeguarding of a greater number of lives. During that time period, Tomo Yukishiro's thoughts began to shift. Initially, she desired to exact revenge on Kenshin, but the feelings eventually shifted to one of admiration and affection. Tomo Yukishiro made the decision to travel to see the Shogunate Shadow Assassin group by herself in order to put an end to the plan to kill Kenshin. While there, Tomo Yukishiro encountered Tatsumi, the leader of the Shogunate Shadow Assassin gang. When Tomo Yukishiro met with Tatsumi, he inquired as to why the Shadow Assassin group was moving before the report, which was about discovering the weakness of the Battousai Hitokiri. At that moment, Tomo Yukishiro was taken aback by Tatsumi's response. Tatsumi disclosed the fact that Tomo Yukishiro was not employed for the purpose of discovering Kenshin's flaws, but rather to become Kenshin's very own keelman. This was the case despite the fact that Kenshin was the most powerful slayer, but Kenshin was still a man who had affections for a woman. Tatsumi came to the realization that Kenshin was obsessed with Tomo Yukishiro's presence. As a result, Tatsumi came to the conclusion that the weak spot of Hitokiri Battousai would be established. If Kenshin discovered that Tomo Yukishiro was actually a spy and that he had slain Tomo Yukishiro's betrothed, then Kenshin would experience an unraveling and become weak. It turns out that Lazuka has returned to see Kenshin in order to inform him that Tomo Yukishiro was, in fact, a spy working for the Shogun's side all along, and that Kenshin was responsible for the death of Tomo Yukishiro's betrothed, Kayasato Akira, in Shigakura, Kyoto region. The words of Lazuka were initially rejected by Kenshin, and Kenshin did not believe Lazuka's statements at all. However, when Kenshin discovered Tomo Yukishiro's diary, which Tomo Yukishiro frequently wrote in while Kenshin was absent, Kenshin's heart got caught between whether or not to trust Tomo Yukishiro. Kenshin is seen walking up the hill to look for Tomo Yukishiro with a fragile heart and vacant eyes. Kenshin is shown walking up the hill after learning the facts about Tomo Yukishiro, which causes him to feel devastated. The Shadow Assassin group of the Shogunate took advantage of Kenshin's delicate state in order to kill him. This was the ideal time to kill Kenshin because he was in a position where he was vulnerable to harm. Nevertheless, despite the fact that the condition of Kenshin's heart is in a fragile state, it is impossible to deny that the instinct as a dangerous killer is still very much present in Kenshin. This is the reason why Kenshin is able to survive and even fight back against attacks from the Shogunate's group of Shadow Assassins, even though he has been subjected to multiple attacks from the Shadow Assassins working for the Shogunate. Once Tatsumi realized that killing Kenshin would still be extremely challenging, she resorted to a backup plan. A smoke bomb containing itoxin was subsequently exploded, which resulted in Kenshin's eyes being temporarily blind. It appears that the plot to employ smoke bombs with eye poison was successful in cornering Kenshin. Tatsumi did not want to waste the opportunity to murder Kenshin right away. Immediately, Tatsumi launched the most devastating attack possible in an attempt to eliminate Kenshin. Tomo Yukishiro, however, sprang out of nowhere to assist Kenshin as the onslaught from Tatsumi was directed toward him. While this was going on, Kenshin, who had just understood that he was about to be attacked, launched a counterattack. In reality, Kenshin's response was intended to be directed at Tatsumi, but, due to the smoke bomb of eye poison, Kenshin's vision was damaged, and as a result, his assault hit Tomo Yukishiro as well, causing Tomo Yukishiro to sustain terrible injuries. The severity of Tomo Yukishiro's injuries makes it quite unlikely that she will withstand her injuries. In the moments leading up to Tomo Yukishiro's demise, Tomo Yukishiro added scratches to Kenshin's cheek, causing the scratches to shape themselves into the letter X. In addition to being a sign that Tomo Yukishiro had always loved Kenshin and did not want him to forget her for all time, it was also a symbol that Tomo Yukishiro had maintained her vow to Kenshin that she would exact revenge on him. His tears accompanied Tomo Yukishiro's departure for all time, and Kenshin's anguish could no longer be concealed. After a few days had passed after the tragic events of Tomo Yukishiro's death and Kenshin's battle with Tatsumi, Kenshin was eventually met by Katsura. Katsura informed Kenshin that Lazuka had been a spy for the shogunate all along, and that Lazuka would soon be put to death because he had been caught. Katsura has expressed her regret to Kenshin for the tragedy that occurred of Tomoyu Kasiro. At this time, Katsura is in need of Kenshin's proficiency once more in order to reorganize the force of the Chosu group and engage in another battle against the shogunate. During the meeting that Kenshin had with Katsura, Kenshin responded by saying that he would grant Katsura's request. Kenshin then made the decision to use his sword and fight the shogunate in order to establish a new age, thus bringing about an era of peace. Kenshin, however, requested Katsura one thing. He was determined and pledged that if the new era comes, he would not slaughter anymore and he did not want to kill anymore. Katsura confirmed that Kenshin was determined. If Kenshin was willing to assist Katsura in its war against the shogunate, Katsura would allow him to do whatever he pleased. Kenshin has finally returned to the fight against the shogunate, and he has been successful in eliminating a significant number of his adversaries. As a result, the term Hitokiri Battousai, also known as Battousai the Slayer, has become even more well-known and has become a legend. Shinsaku Takasuji, who was the head of the Chosu, made the decision to create an alliance with the Satsuma group and the Tosa group. This alliance, together with the combined force of the Satsuma and Tosa groups, combined with the formidable power of Kenshin, resulted in the shogunate being destroyed. The shogunate was defeated in the great conflict that lasted for 4 days and was known as the Fushimi Toba War. The defeat of the shogunate in the Fushimi Toba War marked the beginning of the decline of the power of the Tokugawa shogunate. As a result of the arrival of a large American ship that was pro-Meiji Empire, the shogunate entirely disintegrated and lost control of Japan. As a result, the shogunate came to an end at that time. The Meiji Emperor, who had regained his power, then began a new age in Japan, an era of modernization and an era of globalization that was willing to accept technological improvements from the West. These advancements had been avoided by Japanese rule for a long time under the Tokugawa shogunate era. With the entrance of the new era and the era of peace in order, the name of the renowned Hitokiri Battousai slaughterer gradually disappeared, as if it were being swallowed up by darkness. The new era was known as the Meiji era. There are still certain challenges and obstacles to overcome, despite the fact that the new age has already begun and has been operating for a number of years. It is impossible to deny that the new era is not proceeding as smoothly as expected. Wild samurai and warriors who enjoyed causing trouble in order to obtain money and food were something that the government of the new era had to deal with as one of the challenges that it had to tackle. The wild samurai are now exiled, and there is no work for them. This is due to the fact that in this new era, carrying a sword is regarded to be forbidden, and it is also considered to be useless because the war has ended. The problem of wild samurai who like to cause trouble is not the only problem. The next problem is Western modernization. Globalization does bring a lot of progress to Japan, but it does not always bring positive things to Japanese society. Bad things enter Japanese society as well, such as dangerous illegal weapons that can be misused by groups of people to threaten society, and illegal drugs such as opium, which can harm people's mental health. It made it difficult for the new era government to deal with this issue, and when the Meiji era emperor needed the power of Hitokiri Battousai again, no one knew where he was. After 10 years, the moniker Hitokiri Battousai vanished, but one day rumors about him emerged, claiming to be terrorizing the locals. Saito Hajime, a former commander of the Shinsengumi forces who is now a captain of the Meiji-era police force, came to the realization that the person responsible for the massacre was not the original Battousai but rather another individual who used the name Battousai the Slaughterer to terrorize the citizens and destabilize the government of the Meiji era. In recent times, it has come to light that the individual who has been causing a great deal of concern among the general people is a samurai by the name of Udo Jin. His intention in disguising himself as a Battousai is to entice the genuine Battousai to appear, so that Udo Jin can engage in combat with the real Battousai. Udo Jin is said to have been a participant in the Toba Fushimi War, and at the conclusion of the conflict, he discovered a blade that has a tremendous killing aura. Udo Jin, who was able to sense the aura of the sword's owner, immediately realized that the sword was the sword that had been used by the slaughterer Battousai. At that point, Udo Jin also took the sword, and he was resolved to meet the original Battousai in order to invite him to a duel. In this new age, a great number of samurai and warriors were without jobs and had no master to serve, and Udo-jin was not an exception to this fact. At that time, there was a businessman by the name of Takeda Kanryu who had the intention of employing Udo-jin and a few other warriors in order to assist him in accomplishing his objectives. Takeda Kanryu's objective was to establish control over a number of places in Japan during the new era. It came out that Takeda Kanryu was actually operating a shadowy enterprise, specifically the illegal traffic in opium and weapons, despite the fact that he presented himself as a prosperous businessman. To ensure the safety of his business, Takeda Kanryu requires the assistance of formidable samurai and warriors who will defend him and eliminate everyone who stands in his way. In addition to employing warriors and samurai, Takeda Kanryu also employed a woman by the name of Megumi Takani to assist him in the management of his private opium enterprise. Megumi Takani is of utmost significance to Takeda Kanryu due to the fact that she is a specialist in the mixing of medications and is the sole individual who is capable of perfecting the quality of Takeda Kanryu's opium. Megumi ran away from Takeda Kanryu one day because she was no longer tolerant of working for Takeda Kanryu in terms of criminal activity, including the production of opium. Other than that, the news of Battousai terror that has resurfaced leads a young girl named Kaoru Kamaya, who is the successor to the Kamaya Kashin Ryu Dojo, want to take action in order to put an end to Battousai terror. Kaoru Kamaya believed that the horror of Battousai the Slaughterer was exceedingly upsetting to the community, plus the notorious figure of Battousai in Kaoru Kamaya's mind was quite opposed to the Kamaya Kashin Ryu sword flow, which tries to aid with the sword, and does not use the sword to slaughter. The Kamaya Kashin Ryu sword flow is a sword flow that has been handed down from Kaoru Kamaya's family. One day, Kaoru noticed a wanderer who appeared to be suspicious. The wanderer turned out to be Kenshin, and despite the passage of 10 years since the Toba Fushimi War, there was no obvious difference in Kenshin's face or shape. The Hitokiri Battousai status that Kenshin once held has been fully abandoned. Currently, he is known as Kenshin Himura or Kenshin the Wanderer. When Kaoru first encounters Kenshin, he is under the impression that he is the Battousai who has been causing problems for everyone in the neighborhood recently. This is due to the fact that Kenshin resembles the person depicted in the picture that was posted on the neighborhood notice board. Having Kenshin carry a sword reinforces Kaoru Kamaya's prejudice that Kenshin is the Battousai who has been terrorizing the people recently. As a result, Kaoru wants to arrest Kenshin at that time. However, fortunately, Kenshin is able to stop Kaoru and explain to Kaoru that Kenshin is just a traveler and that the sword he carries is not a sword that is used for killing but rather a Sakabato sword, which is a sword with an inverted blade. Following the completion of Kenshin's explanation, Kaoru Kamaya expressed his regret to Kenshin for the disruption that he had caused. After closely observing Kenshin, Kaoru came to the conclusion that it was highly improbable that the man who appeared to be kind and innocent in front of him was Hitokiri Battousai. Wherever else after discovering that Megumi had fled, Takeda Kanryu instructed Udo-jin to locate her and bring her back. Then, in a manner that was typical of Udo-jin slaughtered the police without any hesitation. According to Udo-jin's estimation, Megumi must have fled and turned to the authorities for assistance. Shino-ippo, the hallmark jutsu of Udo-jin, is used by Udo-jin to eliminate one by one the Meiji police officers that are present. Shino-ippo is a jutsu that uses fear to control a person and make them immobile. Also, the jutsu has the potential to make it impossible for a person to breathe via their lungs. Megumi was fortunate enough to be able to survive the pursuit of Udo-jin at that time. Due to the fact that Udo-jin was unsuccessful in capturing Megumi, Udo-jin desired to go back to the residence of Takeda Kanryu for the purpose to convey the news that he had been unsuccessful in capturing Megumi. While Udo-jin was on his way to the mansion of Takeda Kanryu, he came into contact with Kaoru by a chance encounter. Kaoru was under the impression that Udo-jin was a Battousai, and as a result, she intended to stop him as soon as possible. Kaoru saw that the appearance of Udo-jin at that time was identical to that of the Battousai that had been debated in society not too long before. The choice that Kaoru made, which was related to his desire to capture Udo-jin at that time, was regarded as a highly careless endeavor. In spite of the fact that Udo-jin is not a real Battousai, he is a samurai figure that poses an important danger. Due to the fact that Kaoru had poor fighting skills, Udo-jin is able to easily defeat him. Udo-jin is a cruel and indiscriminate samurai. He has an immediate desire to kill Kaoru on the spot. At At that moment, Kenshin suddenly emerged to save Kaoru from Udoujin. After seeing Kenshin, Udoujin immediately came to the realization that he had discovered the famous Battousai figure that he had been searching for all this time. It was a renowned samurai figure with a crossing scar on his cheek, and it was Hitokiri Battousai, the original slayer. This caused Udoujin's spirit to quickly burn, and he wanted to battle Kenshin as soon as possible. Udoujin immediately attempted to use the Shino Ippo Jutsu on Kenshin, but the Shino Ippo Jutsu had no impact on Kenshin. Udoujin gave a slight smile, as he had anticipated that the Hitokiri Battousai would not be influenced by the Shino Ippo Jutsu. This was possible due to the fact that a true Slayer Battousai would not exhibit any signs of fear or concern in relation to killing. Kenshin knew right away that the person in front of him wasn't a normal samurai, so he took Kaoru away right away. At the same time, Meiji police officers showed up. It was not the appropriate time, in Udoujin's opinion, to go after Kenshin and invite him to a bout at this moment. First, Udoujin made the decision to escape. After Kaoru and Kenshin escaped from Udoujin, Kaoru offered Kenshin to visit her dojo, Kamaya Kashin Ryu Dojo. Next, Kaoru explained the origins of the Kamaya Kashin Ryu Dojo and how it came to be. The dojo Kamaya Kashin is a legacy that was passed down to Kaoru by her father. In the past, the dojo served as a location where individuals might acquire swordsmanship. Within the dojo Kamaya Kashin, individuals are inculcated with the intention of acquiring swordsmanship solely for the purpose of assisting others, and not at the discretion of killing. In spite of this, the dojo Kamaya Kashin gradually started to be abandoned over the course of time, particularly after reports circulated that Battousai, the slaughterer, had returned. The dojo Kamaya Kashin had no one in it at all. There's only one student who continues to learn the sword from Kaoru in the dojo, and his name is Yahiko Myojin. In addition to learning the sword with Kaoru, Yahiko also assists Kaoru in taking care of the dojo Kamaya Kashin by performing tasks such as maintenance the place where the dojo Kamaya Kashin is located and other tasks. Furthermore, Yahiko lives in the dojo Kamaya because he is an orphan. His parents passed away during the Meiji Reform War. After ensuring that Kaoru was in no danger whatsoever, Kenshin parted ways with Kaoru from that point on. Not long after Kenshin left the Kamaya Kashin Dojo, the Kamaya Kashin Dojo was visited by many thugs. They were Takeda Kanryu's men. Their arrival meant to take over the Kamaya Kashin Dojo. It was done so that Takeda Kanryu's business region would expand. At that time, Kaoru Kamaya did not comply with the insistence of the thugs sent by Takeda Kanryu's. This was due to the fact that Kaoru Kamaya would always wish to carry on the legacy of his parents, despite the fact that Dojo Kamaya is currently experiencing challenging times. Because Kaoru was so adamant about protecting the Kamaya Dojo, the thugs of Takeda Kanryu then committed acts of vandalism and acted in an arbitrary manner against Kamaya Dojo. There were several times when Kaoru and Yahiko fought back against what Takeda Kanryu's goons did. However, Kaoru and Yahiko, the only two people in the dojo Kamaya Kashin, appeared helpless in the face of Takeda Kanryu's henchmen. That was the time that Kenshin returned to the dojo Kamaya Kashin. Kenshin had heard from the people that the dojo Kamaya was being vandalized by a group of thugs. In the Kamaya dojo, Kenshin then engages in combat with all of Takeda's goons. Although Kenshin faced numerous of Takeda Kanryu's thugs by himself, he was able to defeat a significant number of them without killing any of them out of the equation. Kaoru was taken aback by Kenshin's ability to vanquish every fenders that approached. Kaoru was brought back to what Udoujin had said, which stated that Kenshin was the legendary Battousai that Udoujin had been searching for all this time. It was initially assumed by Kaoru that the statements made by Udoujin, stating that Kenshin was Hitokiri Battousai, were false. However, after witnessing the magnificence of Kenshin with his own eyes, Kaoru started to believe Udoujin's assertions that Kenshin was the legendary slayer Hitokiri Battousai. As Kaoru became more sure that Kenshin was the famous Hitokiri Battousai, he didn't expect that the man he had attacked at the start of the meeting, who looked innocent and funny, was actually the legendary Hitokiri Battousai the Slayer. The fight that took place between Kenshin and the goons of Takeda Kanryu caused a large number of people to see the Kamaya Dojo. When the police learned about the riot that had taken place at the dojo Kamaya, they also arrived. Kenshin and the other thugs who were participating in the turmoil at the dojo Kamaya were taken into custody as soon as the police arrived at the dojo Kamaya. Kenshin claiming that he was the one who was responsible for the altercation with the thugs that took place in the Kamiya dojo. Kenshin requested that the police not engage Kaoru and Yahiko in the conflict. After that, Kenshin was immediately sent to the Meiji police prison. While he was there, Sato Hajime was waiting for him. It had been 10 years since the two of them had last met, and now they are meeting once more. Sato Hajime has joined the Meiji police force in support of the new era, which means that the two of them are no longer in the camp that is still at war with one another. Kenshin was then directed to meet Aratamo Yamagata, who was a general during the Meiji Empire and is now a high-ranking official in the government of the new era. Sato Hajime was the one who brought Kenshin to have this meeting. In the past, Kenshin and Aratamo Yamagata worked together during the Fushimi Toba War. During their meeting, Yamagata requested that Kenshin come back to fight alongside him, because the new era government was confronted with a number of challenges despite. In order to address the situation and bring about an end to it, Aratamo Yamagata believed that it was necessary to have the strength of Kenshin. The offer extended by Aratamo Yamagata was loudly declined by Kenshin. Kenshin had made a solemn vow to refrain from murdering people and did not wish to take part in any more conflicts. Kenshin simply desired to be a wanderer for the time being. Sato Hajime was a bit irritated by Kenshin's response because he thinks Kenshin's argument is ludicrous. Sato Hajime was a little annoyed. It was so simple for a great slaughterer to throw in the towel when the nation desperately needed his strength back. The fact that Kenshin, who was once a feared slaughterer, no longer desires to kill is something that Sato Hajime is still unable to make sense of. Whether or not Kenshin's intention to stop becoming a slaughterer is genuine, Sato Hajime wants to demonstrate it for himself on his own. After that, Sato Hajime turned his sword onto Kenshin and compelled him to engage in combat. During a brief battle between Sato Hajime and Kenshin, it is discovered that Kenshin does not exhibit the same ferocious killing spirit as he had in the past, despite Sato Hajime's encouragement for Kenshin's killing power to rise. Since Sato Hajime used to revere Kenshin due to Kenshin's amazing sword skills, Sato Hajime feels a little upset to see Kenshin now. Kenshin has grown dull, and Sato Hajime is disappointed to see him. The decision to release Kenshin was finally made by Aratamo Yamagata after he witnessed Kenshin's determination to truly repent of his past as a slaughterer. Yamagata respects that Kenshin chose not to fight again and stopped being a killing Battousai. Kaoru was prepared to welcome Kenshin when he came out. Kaoru wanted to invite Kenshin to stay at the Kamiya dojo for a short time, even though he knew that Kenshin was the legendary Battousai. Kaoru wanted to express his gratitude to Kenshin for the numerous times that he had assisted him. Kenshin responded positively to Kaoru's generous offer. Kenshin is planning to take a short break from his wanderings for the time being. When Kaoru and Kenshin arrived at the dojo, they were taken aback by the sudden appearance of a woman who was present in the Kamiya dojo from nowhere. The woman was actually Megumi Takani, the woman who ran away from Takeda Kanryu's house. Megumi Takani approached Kaoru with a request to allow her to remain at the Kamiya dojo. As long as she was permitted to remain at the dojo Kamiya, Megumi promised that she would be willing to assist Kaoru in taking care of the dojo Kamiya and would also be willing to perform daily chores for Kaoru. At that time, Megumi did not disclose her true identity to Kaoru about who she was. If Megumi were to reveal her background to Kaoru, she was concerned that Kaoru would not allow her to reside in dojo Kamiya. Additionally, Megumi was concerned that Takeda Kanryu would find out where she was hiding. It was Megumi's sole intention to evade Takeda Kanryu's pursuit, and she hid herself in the Kamiya dojo. Megumi was granted permission by Kaoru at that time to become a resident of the Kamiya dojo. Additionally, Kaoru was in desperate need of a female colleague to assist him in managing the Kamiya dojo. Megumi appeared to be having a difficult time, and Kaoru felt sorry for her. Now, Kaoru, Yahiko, Kenshin, and Megumi are all living together in the dojo Kamiya, and they are all equally responsible for the upkeep of the dojo Kamiya. There was a tavern where Kenshin, Kaoru, Megumi, and Yahiko all ate dinner together on a particular evening. During the course of the meal that Kenshin, Kaoru, Yahiko, and Megumi were having together at the tavern, Takeda Ryu and his men arrived. Upon observing the arrival of Takeda Kanryu and his men, Megumi promptly concealed herself. There was a fear that Megumi would be discovered by Takeda Kanryu. However, at that time, Takeda Kanryu's appearance was not for the purpose of searching for Megumi. Rather, Takeda wanted to recruit Kenshin to be one of his men. It would appear that Takeda Kanryu has made a note of Kenshin's abilities, because those thugs belonging to Takeda Kanryu who were responsible for the chaos that occurred in Kamaya's dojo have been vanquished by Kenshin on his own. In the event that Kenshin is interested in joining Takeda, Takeda Kanryu is prepared to pay him a significant amount of money. Although Takeda Kanryu made an offer, Kenshin declined it. The appearance of Takeda Kanryu and his men, who were interested in hiring Kenshin as his swordsman for a very high fee, drew the attention of a great number of individuals. Then, all of a sudden, a man named Sanosuke Sagara appeared before Takeda. Sanosuke told Takeda that if Hitokiri Battousai did not want to take advantage of the opportunity to become Takeda's men for a very high fee, he was prepared to replace him, and Takeda could simply hire him. Everyone who listened to what Sanosuke had to say was taken aback right away. Each and every one of them, including Takeda and his men, had their attention immediately drawn to Kenshin. All of them were unaware that the man in red who appeared to be at ease in fact, Hitokiri Battousai, the legendary figure that had been discussed. It has come to light that Sanosuke is able to ascertain that Kenshin is Hitokiri Battousai. This is due to the fact that Sanosuke was present in the same prison at the time that Kenshin was picked up and taken by Seto Hajime. As soon as Takeda Kanryu listened to what Sanosuke had to say, he questioned whether or not Sanosuke was deserving of working for Takeda and receiving pay of that magnitude. After that, Sanosuke pulled out a very large sword known as Zanbato, and he then issued a challenge to Kenshin. Kenshin gave in to the challenge because he believed that Sanosuke would continue to bother him if he did not respond to the challenge. In addition, Kenshin desired to convince Sanosuke that it would be unwise to put his strength to use for Takeda Kanryu, who exerted oppression over the people in the surrounding area. Kenshin did not really demonstrate his true strength during the battle against Sanosuke. When it came to Kenshin, none of Sanosuke's attacks were successful. Sabasuke's slow movements are unable to keep up with Kenshin's agility, despite the fact that he possesses a great deal of destructive power. Sanosuke is a person who is obstinate, but in the end, he wants to listen to Kenshin's advice that he should not work for Takeda Kanryu, and Sanosuke wants to terminate his conflict with Kenshin. Following the realization that Hitokiri Battousai is a person who cannot be purchased with money, Takeda made the decision to withdraw from the confrontation with Kenshin until further notice. Under other circumstances, Udoujin continues to commit atrocities against innocent people by continuing to use the name Hitokiri Battousai, which causes people to continue to be plagued by fear. When Udoujin discovers that Kenshin, who is now very weak, is quite different from Kenshin, who was once famous for his ferocity, he has a new aim in mind. Udoujin not only wants to provoke Battousai to appear, but he also plans to awaken the ferocity of Hitokiri Battousai. This is because Udoujin has come to the realization that Kenshin does not possess the same level of ferocity as he used to be. The victims of the Udoujin massacre were discovered the following day, and their bodies were discovered. This finding was witnessed by a large number of locals. It was then that Kenshin, who was just passing by at the time, noticed the remnants of the Udoujin slaughter. It was at that very moment that Kenshin suddenly recalled the actions he had taken in the past. Kenshin appeared to come to the realization that despite the fact that he had battled for the period of peace, it was indisputable that he had also left a legacy of sorrow for the families of those who had been killed by Kenshin. In other circumstances, the men of Takeda Kanryu became aware of Megumi, who was hiding in the dojo Kamaya. However, they came to the realization that they could not instantly capture Megumi by force, since they were aware that they would not be able to defeat the Hitokiri Battousai that guarded the dojo Kamaya. As a result, Takeda devised a strategy to coerce Megumi into the act of returning to the Takeda residence against her will. Takeda Kanryu's objective was to sacrifice people nearby around the Kamaya dojo. One by one, the people who lived in the surrounding area became ill unexpectedly and sought assistance at the Kamaya dojo. Sanosuke, who was aware of the predicament of the inhabitants, also provided assistance to the residents who were housed in the dojo. Kaoru, Kenshin, Yahiko, Megumi, and Sanosuke all worked together to take care of the sick people from the neighborhood who live in the Kamaya dojo. It looks like Megumi is very good at taking care of sick people. Megumi has a strong suspicion that the residents of the area have been poisoned by the well water that is located surrounding the settlement. there is something that a lot of people are unaware of, and that is the fact that Megumi Takani is an heiress of the Takani family, which is a family that is well known for its expertise in the field of medicine. In the aftermath of the Eizu War, the Takani family vanished without a trace, and it was said that the only member of the family that survived was a single princess, whose whereabouts were unknown at the time. Megumi came to the realization that the sudden illness that occurred among the locals was a deliberate attempt by Takeda Kanryu to entice Megumi to return to his control. Megumi made the decision to travel to Takeda Kanryu's residence by herself because she was of the opinion that if she did not attend, Takeda Kanryu would behave in a more cruel manner toward the people who lived in the area. That is, without bidding farewell to Kenshin, Kaoru, Yahiko, and Sanosuke. Megumi traveled to Takeda Kanryu's residence by herself. Not only did Megumi come this time to submit herself, but she also arrived with the intention of killing Takeda Kanryu. Megumi tried to kill Takeda Kanryu, even though it put her own life in danger, but she failed. Kenshin, who had previously been unaware of Megumi's scheme, ultimately made the decision to assist Megumi. Next, Kenshin and Sanosuke embarked on their journey to the mansion of Takeda Kanryu. When Kenshin and Sanosuke arrived, the men of Takeda Kanryu were waiting for them. Because there were so many of them, it was inevitable that Kenshin and Sanosuke would have to first fight the men of Takeda Kanryu. Even though they are up against a large number of adversaries, Kenshin and Sanosuke are able to triumph over all of them. Next, in order to track down Takeda Kanryu and find Megumi, Kenshin and Sanosuke broke into Takeda Kanryu's headquarters right away. However, Takeda Kanryu's troops managed to intercept Kenshin and Sanosuke once more. An assassin called Gain intercepted Kenshin. A fighter by the name of Inui Baijin confronted Shinosuke in the interim. The fight between Takeda Kanryu's men and Kenshin and Sanosuke is very intense. For the opponent of Kenshin is an assassin who is just as agile as Kenshin, while battling opponents who are just as tenacious and powerful as Sanosuke is. Kenshin and Sanosuke eventually prevailed over their adversaries after a protracted battle. Kenshin and Sanosuke then proceeded directly to Takeda Kanryu's location on the top floor. When Kenshin and Sanosuke attempted to break into Takeda Kanryu's room, Takeda Kanryu fired a big machine gun at them, making it impossible for them to approach Takeda Kanryu. This made it more difficult for Kenshin and Sanosuke to infiltrate Takeda Kanryu's room. Despite the fact that Kenshin is extremely fast, it is extremely difficult to get to Takeda Kanryu, who is armed with a big fire gun. At that precise moment, Seto Hajime arrived, and he came to assist Kenshin. Kenshin was able to approach Takeda Kanryu with greater ease as a result of Seto Hajime's arrival. In order to disrupt the focus of Takeda Kanryu's shots, Kenshin Sanosuke launches blows from a variety of directions. In addition, Seto Hajime launched an assault from the center, which made it possible for Takeda Kanryu to flee from his machine gun. After that, Kenshin swiftly rushed in front of Takeda Kanryu and defeated him. Immediately after Kenshin, Sanosuke, and Seto Hajime were successful in capturing Takeda Kanryu, they began searching for Megumi. However, when they discovered Megumi, she informed them that Kenshin needed to return to the Kamiya Dojo as soon as possible because Udo Jin intended to kill Kaoru in order to reawaken Kenshin and transform him into Hitokiri Battousai the Slayer once more. Takeda Kanryu is entrusted to Seto Hajime, while Sanosuke is tasked with taking care of Megumi, as Kenshin has requested. To combat Udo Jin, Kenshin will act alone. Upon hearing Megumi's remarks, Kenshin did not waste any time and went back to the Kamiya Dojo. When Kenshin returned to the dojo, he was concerned that Udo Jin had already taken Kaoru away. Right away, Kenshin set out to track down Udo Jin, and he continued his search until he discovered both Udo Jin and Kaoru somewhere in the jungle. Almost immediately, Kenshin drew his sword in the direction of Udo Jin. The two swords of Kenshin and Udo Jin came into contact with each other as they began to assault one another. However, Udo Jin was still dissatisfied with the attacks that Kenshin had undertaken. As far as Udo-jin was concerned, this was not the Hitokiri ability that the Battousai possessed. Udo-jin then employs his jutsu on Kaoru, with the intention of provoking Kenshin's feelings and reawakening the sense of bloodshed that Kenshin possesses once more. After being struck by the Shino Ippo jutsu, Udo-jin informs Kenshin that Kaoru can only survive for a period of 2 minutes. Kenshin must either kill Kaoru or Udo-jin, the jutsu master, if he wants Kaoru to live. After hearing what Udo-jin said, Kenshin made up his mind to kill Udo-jin. Kenshin is confronted with a hard decision. He has previously pledged that he will not kill again. It is a must for a samurai to maintain a certain stance, but at that time, Kenshin was unable to bear the sight of Kaoru passing away in front of his very eyes. Kenshin makes the decision to play the role of the Hitokiri Battousai of the Slaughterer once more in order to save Kaoru. After that, Kenshin utilized the advanced Hiten Mitsurugi Ryu method, namely Ryu Suisen and So Ryusen, which resulted in one of Udo-jin's hands being instantaneously broken and rendered him incapable of holding the sword any longer. Kenshin, who was still extremely enraged, planned to kill Udo-jin as soon as he was lying down in order to save Kaoru. This was because Kenshin was still emotionally stirred up. After that, Kenshin twisted the blade of the Sakabato sword so that it was facing downward toward Udo-jin. However, Kaoru tried to stop Kenshin from killing Udo-jin. It was ultimately possible for Kaoru to break free from the Shino Ippo jutsu because he had a strong determination to struggle against the influence of the Shino Ippo jutsu. Kaoru is adamant that Kenshin should not return to his previous role as a slaughterer. Following the hearing of Kaoru's remarks, Kenshin immediately halted his sword swing. Kenshin switched his attention to Kaoru and made the decision to allow Udo-jin to continue living. It would appear that Udo-jin is still interested in raising his sword, but, this time, the sword assault that Udo-jin launches does not result in Kenshin but rather results in Udo-jin himself. It would appear that Udo-jin made the decision to end his life because, without the capacity to use his sword, he felt his life to be ended. With the passing of Udo-jin, the phony Hitokiri Battousai horror that had been causing the residents to be concerned came to an end as well. Kenshin took Kaoru back to the Kamiya dojo after Udo-jin was killed and Takeda Kanryu was caught for illegal weapons and opium drugs. After a few days had passed, Kaoru was eventually able to come to. When Kaoru first opened her eyes, she was under the impression that Kenshin had gone wandering once more because she was unable to locate Kenshin. Then, however, Kenshin showed up and announced that he was not going anywhere. Kenshin made the decision to remain in the Kamiya dojo with Kaoru, which caused Kaoru to develop a great deal of joy. The presence of Kenshin, Megumi, and Sanosuke, who are all interested in assisting Kaoru in the process of rebuilding Kamiya dojo, has increased so that the dojo is no longer as quiet as it was in the past.